Hi there. So now we come to thinking about physical space and how we present ourselves physically in a space. This is going to be really important in an interview or presentation situation. And it's not about trying to fake it, but it's about finding ways of thinking about your body and developing an awareness of what your body is doing, and then how that's perceived by people who are watching you. And there are a huge range of tools and techniques you can use to make yourself feel more confident and to relax yourself in situations that are quite stressful. And I'm going to suggest a few of those today. Now, the thing to say about this work is that it's work that you have to keep doing. Like if you're going to the gym, this is physical work and you are retraining your muscles and ways of thinking, the habits that we all fall into. The people that tend to always close off their bodies or cross their legs or stand with weight on one leg. We all have habits. I tend to tense my shoulders when I get nervous, and thinking about that as a sort of starting point is very useful. So just a lot of this work is part of actor training, and we're not really conscious about a lot of what we do with our bodies. So you should take a moment just to sort of, even if as you're seated at the chair, like how do you hold yourself? Where do you hold tension? And just notice that. So there are things we can do to release that tension. So for example, if my shoulders were getting tight, just relax them and let them go. And all of those sort of habits of where we hold tension are going to be really important to keep in mind. But the first thing that we really need to do before we go into a public speaking situation is to think about our breath, it will obviously be very closely connected with voice work, which we'll be looking at in the next video. But the first thing to do is get control of your breath and know where you're breathing, and that will help you feel more confident, it will make you appear more relaxed, and it will help you speak better. So let's think about how we breathe. When we're tense and anxious, and we're likely to be in interview situations or presentation situations, often our breath comes here, but on the chest. And you just notice my shoulders go up when I try and breathe in from this point. So that's what we do when we're quite tense. And if you just, without doing it too many times, but just have a go once, notice what happens to your body. So I get tight across the chest, my shoulders go high, I'm not able to draw in a long breath. It makes me feel a bit nervous. My knees and legs have locked, so they feel tight now, and my muscles feel very tight. And that physically is going to read on a stage if you're presenting or in an interview situation. That's going to make you feel quite closed off, quite anxious, and people will read that. So we need to think about our breath. And I suppose, if there's one thing you go away with today from this video, it's about trying to get your breath lower. So the very first thing you can do is you can find a wall, or you can just find a place either standing or seated. And what you're going to try and do is to draw the breath in deeper. Now I'm just going to stand up for a moment to show you what muscles we want to engage. So around here, your stomach and your lower back, and you often can put your hands on your lower back there. You're going to try and use those muscles. So you're going to use those muscles as you draw in the breath, and the breath will drop lower. Yes, our lungs are up here, but I want you to think about the breath going much lower in your body so that we keep connected with our legs. I want you just to take in a breath on about beat of 4. Feel your belly relax, feel your back relax, and then just release that. Almost like a sigh. You just let that go. Now I just want you to practice that a few times. You can pause the video and just practice that a few times, getting your breath as low as you can. And you should do that 3 or 4 times. And if it helps to push against a wall, because sometimes having a connection with something can help us get that breath low as well. So have a go at that. Now, once we get our breath lower, we immediately feel more relaxed. You'll notice that I can't tense up in the same way, and I feel more connected to my whole body. So if I'm going to be standing, then that's useful to feel connected to my whole body, and that I'll be able to draw on that whole breath. And physically, I will appear more open. And I think it's really important when you think about once you've been doing some exercise, things like that, that your body feels more relaxed. You don't hold tension in the same way because you're tired and exhausted, so you can't. And I'm not saying you have to get to that place, because obviously we need to be energized in a public speaking setting. But to have that sense of relaxation is going to be really important. And if we create the feeling in our body, then that can actually then manifest itself psychologically as well. Because if we take that time to breathe, then we don't get that panicked breath, and we're more likely to be calm and connect with what we need to do. So that's getting the breath down, which first of all, and then just generally warming up the body. So things you can do at home, if you can do a warm up, there is the folded leaf, which is when you sort of lie in the prayer position. There are rib stretches, and we'll look at some of that in a bit. But there are other ways to sort of loosen and warm the body as well. So you might think about doing some of that before you went into an interview situation. But obviously, if you're outside a room or something like that, then doing that breath work is something small you can do that's not really noticeable. It's sort of subtle work. So then I want to think now about how we present ourselves and think of ourselves, and think about a bit about introverted and extroverted behavior, and what I call sort of spheres of concentration, or where we focus. So if you think about people who are very introverted people, and again, this is done without judgment at all, because we all have moments of being introverted. In fact, I think of myself as a bit of an introvert. But if you notice what people do physically, they might close their bodies off, they might drop their voices down, and they might cross their legs. And so there's this closed off position that is obviously not particularly helpful in a public speaking situation. Equally, at the other extreme, you can have the bombastic sort of presenter. So if we're thinking about, using politicians as examples, but you've got Tony Blair, who's very physically, but uses lots of symmetrical gestures. Boris Johnson's very emphatic with his hands, and he's very bombastic. And again, that can also feel disconnected. And for an audience, we can switch off from that because it feels too much. It feels like bluster. That's sort of a kind of, if we think about these in terms of spheres, that if this is sphere 1, that's sphere 3, where I'm sort of overcompensating. And again, that can become distracting in a presentation situation. So what we're looking for is something we call neutral. And that neutral sphere is where we can connect with each other. And it is more heightened than a natural conversation, between one person. But it's something that's open, ready. It's about listening physically as well. And so thinking about how that manifests in our body posture. So if we're sat on a chair or a sofa, then we want to be sat on the edge. We want to be open, with our body open, without our arms being crossed. We want our legs to be relaxed in front of us. And you can just rest your hands on your knees or on your legs and be open like that. This immediately is warm. If you're presenting as well, I would say don't get stuck behind a table or a lectern. You want to be able to move freely. And when you're presenting up on your feet, actually, it's good to have 1 or 2 anchor points in a room. So if I've got my presentation happening on a wall here, then this is my kind of rooted spot. But there might be moments when I can cross in front of it or cross to the other side on a diagonal. That's very useful and very compelling to watch. So thinking about your position if you're up as well, and being open. Again, don't cross your arms. Keep your weight through both feet, so don't lean more onto one side or cross your legs as you're standing. All of that is worth keeping in mind as well physically. So just take a moment now to either sit or stand and try and be open and try and be relaxed and keep the breath low in that point. So that's what I'd like to have a go at now. When you've done that, now I want to think about little tricks we can do that can make us more compelling in an interview and public presentation situation. So when people are presenting, when we're talking, we connect with our audience out there, and we might look to people. Again, there's the difference between looking across an entire sea of people, if you've got 30 people in the room, or if you're in an interview panel, you've got 3 people there and you sort of move across each without really connecting with anyone. I would say picking 1 or 2 anchor points in your audience or your room is really useful. So for my EPQ presentation, I might have someone at the front here, and then because diagonals are compelling, I might put someone else at the back that I'm going to keep referring to. And this doesn't mean you can't look at anyone else in the room, but if I really connect with this person in the front when I'm making a point, but then I want to make another point out over here, the rest of the audience are compelled to follow us because we are making connections with people. So I think if you're making eye contact, it's good to make direct eye contact with one or two people, but also not to get stuck on one person, to keep that fluid, to keep that movement between, I think is really useful. Then, now we need to think about, well, when we're communicating an idea, there are moments where we take pause, and physically that can manifest in a number of different ways when we're reaching for a new thought. Now, a lot of the time, and notice what you do here, when you go for a new thought, you might look down and then come back as you get a new idea, as you're thinking about what you want to do next. Yes, this is what I want to do. Or if I'm looking at my notes. This isn't particularly helpful in an interview situation or presentation. We don't want to be looking down or doing a dip away from our audience as much as possible. Sometimes we might need to. But on the whole, we want to avoid that. So what I want you to imagine is that you've got a thinking box, or two of them actually. So this is an imaginary box that I place out in front of me at a 45-degree angle. So these boxes that are imaginary boxes that can be, sort of 2-3 feet away from you or even further, but they're on these diagonals. These are where you go to when you finish making a point and you're looking for your next point to make. So I finish my point, then I go to my thinking box. Then I come back to my audience as I make my new point. Thinking box, back to my audience. Because it's really compelling to watch people as they think. And again, this can help with rushing through a speech as well, or a presentation, that you want to be able to be seen as you're thinking. And audiences like to see a person thinking as well. It's something very compelling about that. So just have a go now, taking a section of your speech, if you've got a presentation, or if you've got an interview setting for your extended essay, think about a particular question you might be asked. And I want you to go from the thinking box as you think about what you want to deliver to then focusing on someone you've put out in the audience here, or your interviewer in front of you. So just have a go at that. Great. Once you've had a go at that, we now come to think about gesturing. So I talked a little bit earlier about our politicians. So we have our Tony Blair, who used lots of symmetrical gestures, and he was a fairly good public speaker actually, but he did use a lot of symmetrical gesturing, very emphatic gesturing, and I know there's been a lot of comments on recently on the Boris Johnson video with his hands and too much use of the hands. But the fact is that in communication we use our bodies a lot. I think you'll probably know that only 7 or 8% of communication is verbally. But actually, as an audience, we're always reading other physical signs when we're trying to understand what we're being asked about. So notice what I'm doing with my hand when I'm making a point. We're thinking about asymmetric gestures now. So for example, if I was thinking about someone wearing a tie, for example, my hand goes to where a tie would be and it makes a slight gesture. This is what we call an echo gesture. And these are really interesting to watch as well if they're used sparingly. So I would like you to practice now thinking about, okay, and I don't want you to get too conscious about this, but picking 2 or 3 points, thinking about if I have to make a gesture, if I'm making a particular point, what would that be out in space? What would an image be for a particular thing I need to talk about, and to create that? And to help practice this, you can put one hand under your bottom or behind your back, so you can only use one hand, and then you try it with the other hand as well. Because we want to try and avoid this symmetrical or emphatic gesturing. We want to find the naturalistic conversational gestures that we have that draw an audience in again. So these are asymmetric gestures or echo gestures that can really make a speech more visually interesting to watch as well. So you could have a go at 2 or 3 of those. Once you've done that, then the key is to forget about them. because this is the issue now, is that a lot of, and this is why I think you need to practice this a lot. So you'd come up with a routine every day where I'm going to do a bit of a warm up, physical warm up. I'm going to get my breath low, and then I'm going to practice with my speech or a couple of questions at the interview, doing my asymmetric gestures or using the thinking box. But then you've got to get to a stage where you don't think about it, because we go through this stage of being sort of consciously incompetent, as it were, about these things that we don't do, and we're trying to learn new techniques because we're trying to break old habits. But then you keep doing it over a series of days, and then you forget about it. You think, I'm not going to try and think about thinking boxes or gestures at all. I may just check in with my breath and at the start of a speech, and that, or between questions, I might just check my breath is low, take one deep breath. But otherwise, I'm not going to obsess about it. And then it will hopefully move into a sort of unconsciously competent state where you're doing these new habits because you practice them. It's muscle memory again. This is all physical muscle memory. And so then you've developed new techniques that become part of you and part of your public speaking skill set. So that's just a series of sort of physical journeys and ideas to take through. And again, just to clearly point out that these are things you do and practice every day, and that you'll get better over time. It's not something you should immediately apply, or I'm going to do this particular gesture on that particular word or line. I think if you take it to that kind of level, then it's probably going to become more artificial again. So you want to avoid that with the work. So that's the physical side. And now in the next video, we'll begin to think how the breath connects into our voice and how we articulate ideas.